Welcome, dear friends, to a gentle journey through the story of Minecraft's Creeper, that green explosive creature that has become gaming's most unlikely icon. Tonight, we will explore 125 facts about this mob that was born from a coding mistake and grew into a cultural phenomenon, told not with fear, but with the calm appreciation of those who have learned to respect the hiss and survive the explosion. These facts will ease you towards sleep while celebrating the creature that taught us to always check our surroundings, and that sometimes the best designs emerge from happy accidents. If you enjoy this peaceful exploration of Minecraft's most explosive resident, please consider subscribing and share with me in the comments where you're watching from tonight and your most memorable creeper encounter. I love hearing the stories of destruction and survival, so settle in, close your eyes when ready, and let us explore the creeper together, from accidental creation to beloved mascot. The creeper was born from a coding mistake when Notch was attempting to create a pig model in the early days of Minecraft development, accidentally switching the height and length values in the code and creating the vertical creature instead of the intended horizontal pig. Where a pig should have been low and wide, the mistaken code produced something bizarrely upright and narrow, a confused mess of textures stretched in wrong directions that looked nothing like any real animal. Most developers would have immediately deleted this obvious error, corrected the values, and moved on with creating the pig they'd intended. But Notch looked at this accidental tall creature and saw something interesting, something that could become its own mob rather than simply being a mistake to fix. That moment of creative recognition, seeing potential in error rather than just seeing failure, transformed what could have been a footnote about a coding bug into the origin story of gaming's most recognizable hostile mob. The decision to embrace the mistake rather than erase it demonstrated the kind of creative flexibility and willingness to follow interesting accidents that characterized early Minecraft development, where happy coincidences often became permanent features. Notch's decision to keep the mistaken tall creature and develop it into an actual mob showed his intuition about what made interesting game design, as he recognized that this strange vertical creature could become something memorable if given proper behavior and purpose. Rather than making it just another generic hostile mob that attacked through melee like zombies or skeletons that shot from distance, Notch decided the creature should explode when close to players, creating a suicide attack mechanic that was both terrifying and completely unique in the game at that time. The explosion mechanic meant that even killing the creature successfully didn't guarantee safety, as poor timing or positioning could still result in dying to the blast even after dealing fatal damage. This risk-reward tension made the creature immediately interesting. From a design perspective, it wasn't just another enemy to fight, but a genuine threat that required different strategies and awareness than other mobs demanded. The decision to make the creature explode transformed it from curious mistake into memorable enemy, giving it distinctive identity that ensured it would stand out in players' memories and become more than just another hostile entity to avoid or fight. Early creeper behavior in Minecraft's initial versions was somewhat different from modern creepers, with the explosion mechanics and AI being refined through multiple updates as Notch and later developers adjusted how the mob functioned based on player feedback and observed gameplay. The earliest creepers moved toward players and exploded perhaps more quickly than modern versions, giving less time to react and creating frequently frustrating encounters where players barely had time to register the threat before the explosion destroyed them and their surroundings. The explosion radius and damage values went through various adjustments as developers balanced the creeper to be threatening without being so overpowered that encounters felt unfair or impossible to survive. The pathfinding AI improved over time, making creepers more effective at navigating terrain and finding routes to players rather than getting stuck on obstacles or giving up pursuit easily. These iterative improvements demonstrated that even the most iconic game elements weren't designed perfectly on first implementation, but rather were refined through observation, testing, and adjustment until they reached the balanced state that made them memorable for right reasons, rather than just being frustrating or broken mechanics. The distinctive hissing sound that creepers make became one of gaming's most recognizable and anxiety-inducing audio cues, a sound that instantly triggers fear and panic in anyone who has spent significant time with Minecraft. The hiss begins when a creeper reaches detonation range and starts its fuse countdown, giving players approximately 1.5 seconds to react before the explosion occurs. The sound design brilliance lies in how perfectly the hiss communicates urgency without being so loud or sudden that it feels cheap or unfair. It's threatening but also provides clear information about what's happening and roughly how much time you have to respond. The hiss has become so associated with creepers that hearing it in real life from Steam releases, air leaks, or other sources can trigger momentary panic in Minecraft players who instinctively associate that sound with imminent explosion. The audio cue demonstrates perfect game sound design, where a simple sound effect conveys complex information, danger, urgency, approximately how much time remains, while also being distinctive enough that it never gets confused with other game sounds, even during chaotic situations with multiple audio sources competing for attention. Why creepers became so terrifying to players goes beyond just their explosive attacks to encompass how their entire design created perfect storm of anxiety-inducing elements that made every encounter tense regardless of player experience level. The silent approach meant you often didn't know a creeper was nearby until you heard the hiss, creating constant low-level paranoia about what might be lurking just outside your field of view. The explosion mechanic meant that even experienced players with good equipment could be caught off guard and killed. That skill and preparation didn't guarantee safety the way they did against most other mobs. The damage to builds added extra stakes beyond just player death, as careless creeper encounters could destroy hours of construction work in seconds, making every creeper near your base a potential catastrophe rather than just an inconvenience. The speed at which encounters escalated from normal to critical, from spotting a creeper to hearing the hiss to explosion, was just seconds, created intense pressure that left no time for careful planning or considered response, only reactive panic. These combined elements made creepers genuinely threatening in ways that other hostile mobs never quite achieved, creating enemy that remained dangerous and feared even after players had mastered combat against every other threat in the game. The silent approach mechanic that allows creepers to walk up behind players without making sounds became their most insidious feature and the source of countless heart-stopping moments across millions of Minecraft playthroughs. Unlike skeletons whose bow sounds telegraphed their presence or zombies whose groaning moans gave advance warning, creepers made no characteristic sounds while pursuing players, blending perfectly with ambient noise and environmental sounds until they were close enough to begin their detonation sequence. This silence meant that headphones became almost mandatory for serious Minecraft play, as hearing footsteps behind you provided the only warning that something might be approaching, though footsteps alone couldn't distinguish between creepers and other mobs until you turned around to check. The silent stalking created paranoia that made players constantly check behind themselves, scan their surroundings more frequently, and develop hypervigilance about potential threats lurking just outside their vision. The mechanic taught players that complacency was dangerous, that you could never truly relax even in familiar territory, that letting your guard down for even moments could result in explosive consequences. This constant tension, this inability to ever feel completely safe, elevated creepers from simple enemies into psychological threats that shaped how players approached the entire game. Explosion damage and radius calculations in Minecraft are complex, with the creeper's blast creating sphere of destructive force that affects blocks and entities within range, dealing varying damage based on distance from the explosion center. At point-blank range, a creeper explosion deals massive damage that can kill unarmored players instantly and severely injure even those with full diamond armor, making direct hits almost always catastrophic. The explosion radius extends several blocks in all directions, meaning you need to be quite far from the creeper when it explodes to avoid all damage, further than most players instinctively think when they first start playing. The block damage follows different rules than entity damage, with explosion resistance values determining which blocks survive and which are destroyed, creating situations where your character might survive but the ground beneath you gets destroyed, potentially causing fall damage or other secondary problems. The explosion also causes knockback that can throw players significant distances, potentially off cliffs or into other hazards, adding another layer of danger beyond the direct explosion damage. Understanding these mechanics, knowing roughly how far you need to run, which materials resist explosions, how to position yourself to minimize damage, separates experienced players who handle creepers confidently from newer players who panic and often make situations worse through poorly chosen reactions. Creeper spawning conditions follow standard hostile mob rules, requiring light level of 7 or less on Java Edition or light level of 0 on Bedrock Edition, with creepers spawning on solid opaque blocks in any biome where hostile mobs can appear. The spawning mechanics mean that creepers can appear anywhere that's sufficiently dark, making lighting absolutely essential for keeping areas safe and preventing the terrifying situation of creepers spawning inside your base while you're working. The creepers spawn at the same rates as other hostile mobs, not being especially rare or common, though players often feel like they encounter creepers disproportionately because creeper encounters are more memorable and consequential than fights with other mob types. The spawning continues throughout the night and in dark areas during day, creating constant threat in unlit caves, forests with heavy tree cover, or anywhere shadows create pockets of darkness sufficient for mob generation. The spawning rules mean that creeper-proofing areas requires comprehensive lighting coverage without gaps or dark corners, where a single creeper might spawn and ruin your day, that you can't half commit to safety, but must thoroughly light areas if you want to prevent spawns reliably. Day and night behavior patterns show creepers following the same basic rules as other hostile mobs, spawning during night and in darkness while burning in direct sunlight during day if they can't find shade. The daylight burning creates rhythm where night is significantly more dangerous as creeper populations build up, while daytime clears out many creepers through sunlight exposure, though survivors in shade or caves remain dangerous. The burning animation and behavior often led to situations where players emerged from shelters in morning to find smoldering creepers desperately seeking shade, creating opportunities to safely eliminate them from distance while they were distracted by self-preservation. The day-night cycle meant that players who ventured out at night took significantly greater risks, as creeper populations peaked during these hours when spawning was active and existing creepers weren't being removed by sunlight. The pattern encouraged players to respect Minecraft's day-night cycle, to build shelters and stay safe during night rather than wandering carelessly, to understand that time of day affected danger levels and that working at night required extra precautions or acceptance of elevated risk. The creeper's face, with its simple pixelated design consisting of 4 dark pixels for eyes and 4 for mouth, created one of gaming's most recognizable images despite or perhaps because of its minimal complexity. The face pattern looks somewhat like a sad or concerned expression, with the dark squares forming something that suggests eyes and a frowning mouth, though the abstract nature means different people see different expressions in the same pixels. The simplicity meant the face was instantly readable even at low resolutions or small sizes, working equally well on tiny game sprites, massive billboards, and everything in between without losing recognizability. The symmetry and geometric clarity made the face easy to reproduce, encouraging fan art, pixel art, and merchandise that could capture the creeper's essence without requiring artistic skill or complex rendering. The iconic status of such a simple design demonstrated that memorability came more from distinctiveness than from complexity, that 4 dark squares arranged in specific pattern could become more recognizable than elaborately detailed faces if they appeared in the right context and became associated with strong emotional responses. The face became shorthand for Minecraft itself, appearing on merchandise and in marketing, because even people who'd never played the game could recognize it, demonstrating how a simple design could transcend its source material to become broader cultural symbol. How the face became iconic involved the perfect storm of the game's massive popularity, the creeper's memorable gameplay impact, and the design's inherent reproducibility, combining to make the face appear everywhere that Minecraft culture existed. Players drew the face in pixel art both in-game and in other media, creating countless reproductions that reinforced the pattern's recognizability. The face appeared on merchandise almost immediately as Minecraft's popularity exploded, with t-shirts, posters, toys, and countless other products featuring the simple green face. Content creators used the face in thumbnails and branding, associating their Minecraft content with the game's most recognizable image. The meme culture around Minecraft elevated the creeper face to symbol status, where showing just those pixels was enough to communicate entire concepts about gaming, explosions, or Minecraft specifically. The iconic journey showed how images became cultural symbols, not through deliberate branding campaigns, but through organic adoption and reproduction by communities who found the image meaningful and useful for communicating their interests and experiences. Creeper merchandise explosion in the early 2010s saw the creeper face appearing on virtually every type of product imaginable, from clothing to school supplies to bedroom decorations to food items and beyond. The merchandise demonstrated Minecraft's cultural penetration and the creeper's position as the game's primary mascot, despite Steve being the player character and perhaps the more obvious choice for representing the game. Children wore creeper hoodies with faces on the hoods, carried creeper backpacks to school, slept in creeper bedding, and surrounded themselves with creeper imagery in ways that made the mob's face ubiquitous in youth culture. The merchandise quality varied wildly, from official high-quality products to obvious knockoffs and unauthorized uses, though the simple design meant even low-quality reproductions were recognizable. The commercial success of creeper merchandise validated Mojang's decision to embrace the creeper as mascot, showing that the mob resonated with audiences in ways that justified its prominent placement in marketing and branding. The merchandise phenomenon also created interesting situations where the creeper became many children's introduction to Minecraft. They recognized and liked the character from products before ever playing the game, inverting the normal order where you play a game, then buy merchandise of characters you encountered there. The SSS meme and various text representations of the creeper's hiss became popular in Minecraft communities as way to reference creepers or express explosive destruction in text form. The onomatopoeia captured the hissing sound effectively enough that even without audio, people who knew the sound could hear it when reading the text. The meme evolved into various forms. That's a very nice everything you have there. It would be a shame if something happened to it. SSSS, playing on the creeper's tendency to destroy player builds and creations. The text meme demonstrated how distinctive game elements could transcend their medium and be referenced and discussed through completely different communication forms. How a sound effect could become a written meme that conveyed meaning and triggered emotional responses in people familiar with the source material. The various permutations and evolution of creeper memes showed healthy, engaged community that enjoyed playing with the game's elements creatively, that found humor in their frustrations and shared experiences, that bonded over common enemy that everyone had encountered and had stories about. Creeper, in early Minecraft versions during alpha and beta, showed the mob's evolution from rough initial implementation into the polished threat that eventually became iconic. The early creeper models and textures were refined over time, with subtle adjustments to appearance and animation that made the mob feel more polished and professional as Minecraft itself matured from indie project to major game. The explosion mechanics were tuned and adjusted, with damage values, radius, and block destruction being modified to find the right balance between threatening and fair, between challenging and frustrating. The AI pathfinding improved dramatically across early versions, transforming creepers from enemies that often got stuck or gave up pursuit into relentless threats that could navigate complex terrain and find you even when you thought you'd escaped. The spawning rules and rates were adjusted to prevent situations where creepers became too common and made normal gameplay impossible, or too rare and lost their impact. These iterative improvements demonstrated typical game development process, where initial implementations were functional but rough, requiring repeated refinement to achieve the polished experience that players eventually received and that made creepers memorable for right reasons, rather than being remembered as frustrating broken enemies. The green texture and its appeal made creepers visually distinctive, while also creating interesting in-universe questions about what these creatures were and why they looked the way they did. The green color suggested plant-like biology, or perhaps some connection to moss or vegetation, inspiring community theories about creeper origins and nature. The mottled texture with lighter and darker green pixels created depth and visual interest despite the low resolution, making creepers readable and recognizable even at distance or in poor lighting conditions. The color choice also made creepers stand out against most environmental backgrounds. The green contrasted with stone in caves, with wood in forests, with sand in deserts, ensuring that creepers were usually visible rather than blending perfectly into surroundings in ways that would make them impossible to spot. The green became so associated with creepers that seeing that specific shade and texture pattern in other contexts immediately triggered Minecraft associations, demonstrating how color choices became part of character identity as much as shape or behavior. The texture's appeal extended to it being relatively easy to reproduce in fan art and merchandise, while still being distinctive and recognizable, finding sweet spot between simplicity and interest that served the character well across all its various appearances and reproductions. Creeper AI and pathfinding showed increasingly sophisticated behavior as Minecraft's mob AI systems improved over the years, with creepers learning to navigate complex terrain, use doors in some cases, and pursue players more effectively. The creeper's approach pattern was designed to feel menacing and deliberate, with the mob walking purposefully toward players rather than running frantically or behaving erratically. The AI included behaviors for dealing with obstacles, finding paths around barriers, and generally doing everything possible to reach detonation range of the player. The pathfinding improvements meant that hiding from creepers became more difficult over time, as they learned to navigate around obstacles that would have stopped early version creepers completely. The AI didn't include sophisticated tactics or complex decision-making. Creepers weren't using cover or feinting, but the straightforward, relentless approach was effective and created the feeling that these mobs had a single-minded purpose of getting close enough to explode. The balance between AI sophistication and simplicity worked perfectly for creepers, making them threatening without being frustratingly intelligent or cheap, creating enemies that felt fair even when they killed you, because you could understand their behavior and develop counter strategies once you learned their patterns. Light-level spawn requirements created clear rules about where creepers could appear, empowering players with knowledge that lighting areas thoroughly would prevent spawns and keep locations safe. The requirement that light level be 7 or below on Java Edition meant that torches needed to be placed at specific intervals to prevent any dark spots where creepers might spawn. The spacing calculations became important knowledge for serious players who wanted to creeper-proof areas efficiently without using excessive torches. The spawn rules meant that indoor areas needed internal lighting and that external walls and fences didn't prevent creeper spawns. If the area inside was dark enough, light level mattered more than physical barriers for spawn prevention. Understanding spawn requirements transformed creeper prevention from mysterious, unpredictable problem into manageable challenge. With clear solution, add light until everywhere is bright enough. Check for dark corners and gaps. Maintain lighting as you expand areas. The empowerment through knowledge helped reduce creeper anxiety because players realized they could control whether creepers appeared in areas they cared about, that the threat was manageable through proper preparation and lighting maintenance. Why creepers spawn where they do follows the general hostile mob spawning system, with the game randomly selecting locations that meet spawning requirements and generating mobs including creepers in those positions. The randomness meant that creeper locations were unpredictable, even though their spawn conditions were well understood, creating situations where creepers appeared in surprising places on your roof, in that one dark corner you forgot to light, in the small shadow created by an overhang. The spawning system's random selection meant that sometimes you'd encounter many creepers in short period, while other times you'd go long stretches without seeing any, creating variable threat levels that kept gameplay interesting and prevented patterns from becoming too predictable. The spawn location selection considered blocks, light levels, and other factors, but didn't consider whether locations were strategically dangerous or whether spawning there would create particularly threatening encounters. The system was neutral and mathematical rather than malicious. The results sometimes felt personally targeted when creepers spawned in worst possible positions. Understanding that spawning was systematic rather than intentionally cruel helped players approach creeper prevention rationally, seeing it as problem to solve through proper lighting and area control rather than as game arbitrarily being unfair. Dealing with your first creeper represented a formative moment in every Minecraft player's journey. The encounter that taught you the game was more dangerous than it might initially appear, and that constant vigilance was necessary for survival. The first creeper encounter often came unexpectedly. You'd be mining or building, focused on your task, then suddenly hear that hiss, and have barely any time to process what was happening before the explosion. Many players' first creeper encounters ended in death, with the confusion about what the green mob was and what the hissing meant, preventing effective response until too late. The deaths and destroyed builds from first encounters were frustrating but also educational, permanently imprinting the lesson that creepers were serious threats requiring immediate response when spotted. The first successful creeper kill or escape felt like genuine achievement, demonstrating that you'd learned the game's rules and could handle its challenges. The first encounter's impact lasted throughout players' Minecraft experiences, creating lasting wariness around creepers that persisted even after hundreds of successful encounters, demonstrating how formative early gaming experiences shaped perceptions and behaviors that endured long after initial learning period. The fear creepers instilled in new players was genuine and memorable, creating anxiety that went beyond typical game challenge into something more visceral and lasting. The combination of explosive consequences, minimal warning, and permanent destruction created perfect conditions for fear development, as the stakes were high and mistakes were punished severely. The fear manifested as hypervigilance, with players constantly checking surroundings, jumping at unexpected sounds, and maintaining constant awareness of potential threats lurking outside their vision. The paranoia that creepers induced changed how players approached the entire game, building differently to minimize explosion damage, lighting obsessively to prevent spawns, fighting more cautiously to avoid situations where creepers could approach during combat with other mobs. The fear gradually transformed from panic and anxiety into respect and caution as players gained experience and learned to handle creepers confidently, demonstrating healthy progression from overwhelming threat to manageable challenge. The lasting impact of creeper-induced fear showed in how even experienced players never became completely casual around creepers the way they might around zombies or other mobs, maintaining healthy respect that prevented complacency and kept encounters tense and engaging even hundreds of hours into gameplay. Creeper damage to builds added extra dimension to the threat, making creepers dangerous not just to player health but to the structures and creations that represented hours of invested time and effort. The explosion crater left by creeper detonation could destroy large sections of walls, remove chunks of floor, blast holes through roofs, and generally undo substantial building work in single instant. The damage felt particularly cruel when it destroyed intricate details or rare materials that would be time-consuming to replace, when explosions damaged farms or contraptions in ways that made them non-functional until repaired. The build damage meant that every creeper near your base was potential catastrophe rather than just annoyance, elevating stakes and making creeper prevention around valued structures essential rather than optional. The threat to builds encouraged players to use explosion-resistant materials for important structures, to create defensive perimeters around bases, and to immediately light any new areas thoroughly before beginning construction. The lesson that builds were vulnerable created lasting impact on how players approached construction, making them think about defense and protection from the very beginning of projects, rather than treating safety as afterthought to add later. Learning to hear the hiss became essential survival skill that separated experienced players who usually survived creeper encounters from newer players who frequently died to explosions. The distinctive sound needed to trigger immediate response. Stop whatever you're doing, locate the creeper, create distance without hesitation or delay that might allow detonation to complete. The reaction became instinctual through repetition, with experienced players automatically jumping backward or sprint hitting before consciously processing what they'd heard, demonstrating how practice turned cognitive processes into automatic reflexes. The hiss recognition extended beyond just hearing the sound to recognizing it instantly, even in chaotic situations with multiple sound sources, filtering it from ambient noise and other mob sounds to identify the threat immediately. The skill development showed how games taught pattern recognition and rapid response through repeated exposure, how experiences trained reflexes and created automatic behaviors that became second nature through practice. The difference between players who consistently survived creepers and those who didn't often came down to this hiss recognition skill, hearing it instantly, knowing exactly what it meant, and responding appropriately in the 1.5 seconds available before explosion occurred. The panic of spotting a creeper at close range created memorable adrenaline-fueled moments where you had to make instant decisions about whether to attack, flee, or build barriers, with wrong choices often resulting in explosive death. The close-range encounter meant you had at most seconds to react before the creeper entered detonation range and began its countdown, requiring immediate action without time for careful consideration or planning. The panic responses varied by player and situation. Some would frantically sprint away, hoping to outrun the blast radius. Others would rush forward with sprint hit technique, trying to kill the creeper before it could detonate. Still others would attempt to build walls or barriers to block the explosion. The encounters tested reflexes, decision-making under pressure, and mechanical skill simultaneously, creating intense moments that lingered in memory long after the immediate threat passed. The panic gradually decreased as players gained experience and learned to trust their practiced responses, transforming from frantic terror into focused, intense concentration, where you executed practiced strategies under pressure. The evolution from panic to practiced response demonstrated learning and mastery, showing how repeatedly facing challenges built competence and confidence that replaced fear with capable action. Creeper blast resistance understanding required learning which blocks survived explosions and which were destroyed, knowledge that informed building material choices and defensive structure design. Obsidian was essentially explosion-proof in normal gameplay, making it ideal for protecting valuable storage or important structures from creeper damage. Cobblestone and stone bricks offered reasonable protection, surviving nearby explosions, though not direct hits, making them popular building materials that balanced accessibility with defensive properties. Wood and dirt offered minimal protection, being destroyed easily by creeper explosions, making them poor choices for structures you wanted to protect from explosive damage. The blast resistance values created material hierarchy, where defensive priorities influenced building material selection, where protection considerations competed with aesthetics and resource availability in determining what blocks to use for construction. Understanding blast resistance transformed building from purely creative activity into strategic decision-making about how to balance appearance, availability, and protection, how to create structures that were both beautiful and defensible, how to use material properties intentionally to achieve functional goals alongside aesthetic ones. Which blocks survive explosions became critical knowledge for designing creeper-resistant bases and protecting valuable structures from explosive damage. The obsidian's near-total immunity made it standard material for vaults and storage areas containing valuable items that would be catastrophic to lose. The stone-based blocks' reasonable resistance made them popular for walls and defensive structures that could withstand nearby explosions, even if not direct hits. The transparent blocks, like glass, had varying resistance levels, with regular glass being fragile, while more advanced glass types offered better protection. The understanding informed design choices about where to use expensive protective materials versus accepting that some structures would be damaged and simply building with easily replaceable materials. The knowledge gap between new players who built entirely with dirt and wood versus experienced players who consciously chose materials based on blast resistance showed how learning Minecraft mechanics informed all aspects of gameplay, how technical knowledge enhanced every activity from mining to building to combat. Early anti-creeper strategies developed by players before wikis and comprehensive guides existed showed creative problem-solving and community knowledge sharing, with players discovering through experimentation and communication what worked against these explosive threats. The basic strategy of hearing hiss, sprinting away, and waiting for explosion to occur safely at distance represented simple but effective approach that worked reliably. The more advanced sprint hitting technique, where you sprinted at the creeper, hit it with sword to knock it back, then sprinted away, required more skill but could kill creepers before they could detonate if executed properly. The wall building strategy, where you place blocks between yourself and creeper as emergency barriers, showed creative use of game mechanics, though it required quick inventory access and building skill under pressure. The cat strategy, where you kept cats around your base to repel creepers, demonstrated discovering unusual mob interactions and exploiting them for protection. These early strategies showed players solving problems through experimentation and creativity, developing tactics before official guides existed to tell them the correct approach, demonstrating how games taught problem solving and encouraged creative thinking about available tools and mechanics. Building defensive walls around bases represented straightforward but effective anti-creeper strategy that created physical barriers preventing creepers from approaching close enough to damage valued structures with their explosions. The walls needed to be tall enough that creepers couldn't see over them, removing line of sight that might cause creepers to approach and detonate against the walls themselves. The wall construction materials mattered, with blast-resistant stone or cobblestone being preferable to easily destroyed wood or dirt that might not withstand explosions from determined creepers. The defensive perimeter created buffer zone, where any creeper detonations would occur far enough from actual base structures to prevent damage, trading some terrain damage for protection of important builds. The wall strategy showed understanding that prevention was easier than response, that keeping creepers away was simpler than trying to stop every explosion reactively, that investing time in defensive construction paid dividends by preventing future damage and loss. The cats and creepers connection, where cats caused creepers to flee and avoid areas where cats were present, became beloved game mechanic that provided in-universe explanation for keeping cats around bases beyond just aesthetic appeal. The creeper fleeing behavior created safe zones around cats, with creepers maintaining distance and retreating if they encountered cats while approaching players. The mechanic inspired theories about creeper biology and cat-creeper relationships, with players joking that creepers were afraid of cats or creating elaborate explanations for the mechanic. The practical application meant that keeping cats around your base provided automatic creeper defense, with the cats serving as living security system that prevented creeper approaches. The cat requirement that players tamed them with fish created progression system, where establishing cat defense required effort and resource gathering, but provided ongoing protection benefits. The mechanic demonstrated Minecraft's approach to creating interesting mob interactions and relationships that gave creatures personality beyond simple hostile, neutral, passive categories, showing how behavior patterns created the sense that mobs had preferences and relationships with each other beyond just their interactions with players. Creepers in the rain behaved the same as in dry weather but created additional danger because the rain sound effects could mask footstep sounds that normally provided warning of approaching mobs. The audio masking meant that the hiss often became the first indication that a creeper was nearby during rain, leaving minimal time to react, since the detonation countdown had already begun when you heard it. The reduced visibility during rain compounded the danger, making it harder to spot creepers at distance and increasing the likelihood of close-range surprise encounters. The rain created conditions where experienced players became extra cautious, knowing that their normal warning systems were compromised and that creeper encounters were more likely to be surprising and dangerous. The weather impact on creeper danger demonstrated how environmental factors affected gameplay beyond just aesthetics, how rain wasn't just visual effect but actual gameplay modifier that changed threat levels and required adjusted behavior and heightened awareness. Creeper behavior changes over versions showed ongoing refinement and adjustment of core mechanics, with developers tweaking explosion timing, AI pathfinding, damage values, and other parameters to maintain balance as game evolved. The changes were usually subtle rather than dramatic, preserving the creeper's core identity while adjusting details to improve gameplay experience and maintain appropriate challenge level. The evolution tracked player skill increase over Minecraft's lifetime, with adjustments ensuring that creepers remained threatening to experienced players who had developed sophisticated counter strategies and mechanical skills. The version changes demonstrated that even iconic mechanics weren't sacred and untouchable, but rather were maintained through ongoing attention and adjustment, that keeping content feeling right required active balancing rather than just leaving things alone once they worked adequately. The creeper, as Minecraft's mascot, seemed inevitable in retrospect, but represented interesting branding choice to make a hostile enemy mob the face of the game rather than the player character Steve or neutral mobs like pigs or sheep. The mascot selection suggested that Minecraft's identity was about challenge and danger as much as creativity and building, that the game's edge and tension were important enough to foreground in branding. The creeper's memorability and distinctive design made it ideal mascot. From practical perspective, it was instantly recognizable, simple enough to reproduce easily, and already appearing in countless community creations and discussions. The mascot role elevated the creeper from simple enemy to something more significant, making it represent Minecraft itself in contexts far beyond just gameplay, turning it into cultural symbol that communicated concepts about gaming, creativity, and digital culture broadly. The journey from coding mistake to cultural icon and game mascot represented remarkable transformation that showed how embracing accidents and following interesting ideas could create outcomes more successful than any deliberate planning might have achieved. And so we close this first part of our creeper journey, having traced the mob from accidental coding error through those first terrifying encounters with the silent green stalker that taught us the meaning of paranoia and constant vigilance. We have seen how a mistake became a feature, how simplicity became icon, how an explosive suicide enemy became beloved enough to serve as mascot for one of gaming's most successful franchises. As you drift towards sleep tonight, imagine hearing that distant hiss, that familiar warning sound, but feeling not panic, but appreciation for the elegance of the creeper's design, for how perfectly it taught caution and awareness, for how even in memory the hiss quickens your pulse just slightly, reminding you that the best game design comes from creating threats that remain engaging and dangerous even after you've mastered them. The creeper waits in every shadow, in every dark corner, patient and expressionless, ready to teach the lesson it's been teaching since 2009, that Minecraft's world is beautiful but never truly safe, that vigilance is necessary for survival, and that sometimes the scariest things are silent until the very last second before they destroy everything you've built. Sleep well, and may no creepers spawn in your dreams, though we both know you'll hear the hiss anyway. That sound permanently etched into the memory of anyone who has loved this game and learned to respect its most iconic creation. Detailed explosion mechanics in Minecraft follow complex calculations that determine damage to both entities and blocks based on distance from the explosion center, with the creeper's blast creating a spherical area of effect that applies force and destruction in all directions. The explosion system calculates ray traces from the explosion center to determine what entities and blocks are affected, with objects closer to the center receiving more damage, while those at the edge of the blast radius receive minimal effects. The power value of a creeper explosion is set at 3 in the game code, which translates to specific damage values and destruction radius that the game engine uses to determine outcomes when explosions occur. The explosion creates both immediate damage to anything within range and knockback forces that throw entities away from the center point, potentially causing secondary damage through fall damage or pushing victims into other hazards. Understanding the mechanical systems underlying creeper explosions transform them from mysterious instant death into predictable events governed by specific rules that could be learned and countered, demonstrating how knowledge of game mechanics empowered players and reduced the seemingly random nature of game events into understandable cause and effect relationships. Blast radius calculations show that a standard creeper explosion affects a sphere of approximately 3.5 to 4 blocks radius, though the exact affected area depends on terrain, obstacles, and specific positioning of the creeper when detonation occurs. The radius means that running away from a creeper requires covering more distance than many players initially realize, as simply backing up a few blocks isn't sufficient to escape the blast damage completely. The spherical nature of the explosion means that being above or below a creeper doesn't necessarily provide safety, as the vertical distance contributes to overall distance calculations just as horizontal distance does. The terrain can absorb some explosion force, with blocks between you and the creeper reducing damage received, though the explosion rays can travel around obstacles to some degree, depending on positioning and geometry. The practical application means that truly safe distance from a creeper is approximately 5 to 6 blocks in any direction, creating a safety margin beyond the maximum damage radius that accounts for lag, reaction time, and movement imprecision. Understanding radius help players develop better survival instincts about how far to run and whether they had time to attack before retreating, transforming panicked fleeing into calculated movement based on spatial awareness and distance estimation. Damage to different materials shows the explosion resistance system, where each block type has a specific blast resistance value that determines whether it survives explosions and how much force is required to destroy it. Dirt and most natural terrain blocks have very low blast resistance and are destroyed easily by creeper explosions, creating the characteristic craters that mark detonation sites. Wood and wooden materials also have low resistance, making wooden structures particularly vulnerable to creeper damage and requiring replacement of destroyed sections after encounters near buildings. Stone and stone-based materials have moderate resistance that allows them to survive nearby explosions, though direct hits will still destroy them, making stone constructions more defensible than wooden ones. Obsidian's extremely high blast resistance makes it essentially immune to creeper explosions, requiring far more force than a creeper can generate to break even a single block. The resistance values create clear hierarchy of defensive materials that informed building choices for players who wanted structures that could withstand creeper attacks, demonstrating how game mechanics shaped construction decisions beyond just aesthetics or resource availability. Entity damage from explosions follows similar distance-based calculations as block destruction, but uses different formulas that account for armor, enchantments, and difficulty settings when determining how much health is lost. An unarmored player caught in point-blank creeper explosion will take massive damage, potentially exceeding 40 health points on normal difficulty, making instant death likely unless the player had eaten recently and had full health. Armor reduces explosion damage significantly, with full diamond armor cutting damage to more manageable levels, though still potentially lethal if caught directly next to the creeper. The protection enchantment further reduces explosion damage, with higher-level protection enchantments dramatically improving survival chances even in close-range encounters. The damage calculations scale with difficulty, with hard-mode creepers dealing more damage and easy-mode creepers dealing less, creating tunable challenge appropriate for different player skill levels. Understanding that armor and enchantments specifically countered explosion damage encourage players to prioritize these defenses when preparing for activities where creeper encounters were likely, showing how knowledge of damage mechanics informed equipment decisions and preparation strategies. Knockback effects from creeper explosions throw entities away from the blast center with force proportional to how close they were to the explosion, potentially causing more danger than the direct explosion damage through environmental hazards. The knockback can throw players off cliffs, bridges, or other elevated positions, causing fatal fall damage even if the explosion itself didn't deal lethal damage. The knockback into lava, water, or other hazards creates secondary dangers where the explosion initiates chain of events, leading to death rather than killing directly. The knockback can also throw you away from your current position in ways that make recovery difficult, separating you from equipment or safety, and potentially placing you in more dangerous situations than you were before the explosion. Understanding knockback risks meant considering positioning relative to environmental hazards when fighting creepers, ensuring that being thrown backward wouldn't result in worse situations than the explosion itself, demonstrating how experienced players thought about space and positioning in 3 dimensions, rather than just considering immediate threats. Creeper fuse timing of precisely 1.5 seconds from the moment the hiss begins until detonation occurs creates the window in which players must react to survive, and understanding this timing is crucial for developing effective counter strategies. The consistent timing means that reactions could be practiced and refined, that you could develop muscle memory for how long you had and what actions were possible within that time frame. The 1.5 seconds is enough time to sprint several blocks away if you react immediately upon hearing the hiss, making distance creating the most reliable survival strategy for most situations. The timing also allows for exactly 1 attack if you're already in melee range and choose to fight rather than flee, though this strategy requires confidence in your ability to kill the creeper with that single hit, or to accept the damage if you fail. The fixed timing rather than random variation meant that outcomes were consistent and predictable, that failures came from execution errors or poor decisions rather than bad luck, making creeper encounters feel fair, even when deadly, because you knew that proper response would succeed reliably. The cancellation window where creepers abandon detonation if you move outside their detection range during the fuse countdown provided crucial escape mechanism that rewarded quick reactions and created tension as you raced to exceed the threshold before explosion occurred. The detonation could be interrupted by getting far enough away that the creeper lost interest and stopped its countdown, allowing you to avoid explosion entirely if you reacted quickly enough to the hiss. The cancellation mechanic meant that hearing the hiss wasn't necessarily a death sentence if you responded instantly with maximum speed retreat, creating moments of intense concentration as you sprinted away, while internally counting down the time remaining before detonation. The mechanic also created interesting situations in combat, where damaged creepers that began detonation could be forced to cancel by retreating temporarily, then waiting for countdown to abort before re-engaging, demonstrating how understanding mob behavior enabled sophisticated tactics beyond simple attacking or fleeing. The cancellation window showed good game design, where mechanics created gameplay tension and rewarded skilled play, while still being accessible enough that learning players could discover and utilize them without needing to read external guides or documentation. Running away strategies developed by players focused on maximizing distance created in the available time, with sprinting being mandatory to achieve safe separation before detonation occurred. The sprint jump technique created slightly more distance per second than sprinting alone, as the jump momentum carried you forward during the aerial phase, making sprint jumping the optimal movement pattern for emergency retreats. The direction of retreat mattered, with moving perpendicular to the creeper's approach angle being most effective for quickly exceeding the blast radius compared to retreating along the same axis as the creeper's movement. The terrain considerations affected retreat effectiveness, with flat open ground allowing simple straight-line sprints, while obstacles, water, or elevation changes required more complex navigation that could slow retreat and prevent achieving safe distance. The development of running strategies demonstrated how even simple mechanics like movement became areas for optimization and skill expression, where understanding exact mechanics and practicing execution created meaningful differences between novice and expert play, despite both groups having access to the same basic movement controls. Sprint hitting techniques, where players sprinted at creepers, landed single melee attack that knocked the creeper backward, then immediately sprinted away, represented advanced strategy that required precise timing and mechanical execution. The sprint attack dealt knockback that bought additional separation distance while also dealing damage, potentially killing creepers in subsequent attacks, or making them easier to finish after the explosion risk passed. The technique required confidence and practice, as any hesitation or execution error could result in being caught in the blast, making it high-risk, high-reward approach that experienced players used but newer players often avoided. The knockback from sprint attacks reset creeper position relative to the player, potentially buying enough time to perform multiple sprint hits in sequence if executed perfectly, demonstrating how mechanical skill could transform dangerous encounters into controlled situations where the player maintained advantage. The technique showed how Minecraft's combat system rewarded understanding of detailed mechanics like knockback, sprint momentum, and attack timing, creating skill ceiling, where dedicated practice enabled capabilities that seemed impossible to players unfamiliar with advanced techniques. Using knockback enchantments on weapons amplified the sprint hitting strategy by increasing the distance creepers were pushed with each attack, making it easier to maintain safe separation while dealing damage. The knockback enchantment came in 2 levels, with Knockback 2 providing substantial pushing force that sent creepers flying backward when hit, creating large separation that gave ample time for follow-up attacks or retreats. The enchantment made creeper combat significantly safer by ensuring that even single hit would create distance, reducing the precision required for sprint hitting technique and making it accessible to less mechanically skilled players. The knockback strategy particularly shined in situations where you had space to knock creepers away from you, though it could be liability in confined spaces where knocking creepers into walls or obstacles prevented them from being pushed far enough to ensure safety. The enchantment demonstrated how Minecraft's progression systems empowered players through equipment improvements, how investing in proper enchantments made challenging encounters more manageable, how preparation through enchanting paid dividends during actual gameplay by reducing risk and increasing control over dangerous situations. Shields and creeper blocking, introduced by the combat update, provided new defensive option against creeper explosions, allowing players to raise shields and completely negate explosion damage if timing was correct. The shield blocking required holding the shield up at the moment of explosion, which could be challenging given the timing, precision needed, and the fact that raising shield prevented sprinting or attacking. The shield strategy worked best when you knew a creeper was about to explode but couldn't create sufficient distance, providing last resort defense that could save you from certain death. The shield durability consumption from blocking explosions was substantial, potentially breaking shields if they were already damaged, or if multiple explosions were blocked in succession, creating resource cost for the defensive capability. The addition of shield blocking expanded creeper counter strategies beyond just movement and combat, giving players who preferred defensive play another tool for survival, demonstrating how game updates could add new mechanics that enriched existing systems and created additional depth without replacing or invalidating previous strategies. Creeper farming ethics and design created community discussions about whether deliberately killing creepers in automated farms was cruel or simply pragmatic resource gathering, though most players concluded that since creepers were hostile mobs that would kill players given opportunity, farming them was justified. The farm designs ranged from simple manual setups where you gathered creepers and killed them yourself, to complex automated systems that spawned, collected, and killed creepers without player intervention. The ethical considerations mostly emerged in role-play contexts or among players who preferred to minimize farming and live more naturally within Minecraft's world, while the majority of players viewed creeper farming as no different from farming other hostile mobs for their drops. The discussion demonstrated how players engaged with games on multiple levels beyond just mechanics, how some players created personal rules and philosophies about in-game behavior, how the community included people with different approaches to what constituted appropriate or ethical gameplay. The farming debate showed healthy community with diverse perspectives who could discuss different approaches without necessarily agreeing, but still respecting that different playstyles were valid. Gunpowder collection methods centered around killing creepers, since they were the primary reliable source for this essential crafting material needed for TNT, fireworks, and fire charges. The manual collection involved hunting creepers at night or in dark areas, killing them one by one, and gathering the 0 to 2 gunpowder drops that each creeper provided. The inconsistent drop amounts meant that gathering significant gunpowder quantities required killing many creepers, making it time-consuming activity that players often avoided until absolutely necessary. The alternative sources like witch drops and gas drops provided supplementary gunpowder but weren't reliable enough to serve as primary sources, making creepers the default target for serious gunpowder gathering. The collection methods demonstrated Minecraft's resource economy, where some materials required engaging with specific dangerous mobs, creating situations where you needed to seek out encounters with threats you might normally avoid, inverting the usual relationship where you tried to prevent mob encounters rather than deliberately seeking them. Manual versus automatic farms represented strategic choice between active gameplay that required constant attention and engagement versus passive systems that worked while you did other activities or were away from the game. Manual farms required you to be present and actively killing creepers, making them more engaging and skill-based, but also time-intensive and tiring for large-scale gunpowder gathering. Automatic farms used game mechanics to spawn creepers in controlled environments, collect them, kill them automatically, and store the drops in accessible chests, requiring only occasional visits to collect accumulated gunpowder. The initial investment in automatic farms was substantial, requiring resources, time, and technical knowledge to build effective designs, but the long-term payoff justified the investment for players who needed large gunpowder quantities for projects. The choice between approaches reflected broader playstyle preferences about active versus passive play, immediate engagement versus delayed gratification, simplicity versus complexity, showing how Minecraft accommodated different approaches to the same goals through its open-ended mechanics and build possibilities. Cat-based creeper farms exploited the mechanic where creepers fled from cats, using this behavior to funnel creepers into specific areas where they could be killed efficiently while preventing them from detonating defensively. The farm designs placed cats strategically so that spawned creepers would move away from the cats, following predictable paths that led them into killing chambers or collection points. The farms were relatively safe to operate since the cats prevented creepers from approaching players, though malfunctions or design flaws could occasionally allow creepers to bypass the cat barriers and create dangerous situations. The cat farm designs represented creative exploitation of mob behavior, taking an interaction that existed for thematic and gameplay reasons and repurposing it into farming infrastructure, demonstrating how Minecraft systems could be used in ways that developers never explicitly intended, but that emerged from interactions between different mechanics. The farm showed player creativity and system manipulation, how understanding mob behaviors enabled building contraptions that automated resource gathering through clever application of behavioral patterns. Spawn platform design for creeper farms required creating dark spaces where creepers could spawn, then implementing systems to move them away from spawn areas to prevent spawn blocking, while also controlling where they ended up for easy collection. The platforms needed specific dimensions to maximize spawn rates, required proper lighting control to ensure darkness where spawning should occur, and often incorporated water flows or other movement systems to transport creepers after spawning. The designs became increasingly sophisticated over time as the community shared innovations and improvements, creating farms that maximized efficiency through optimal spawn rates, minimal spawn blocking, and effective creeper collection and killing systems. The platform design demonstrated technical Minecraft where players treated the game like engineering simulation, calculating optimal configurations and testing designs to maximize output, showing how Minecraft satisfied both creative building impulses and analytical optimization desires through its rich mechanics and systems that rewarded understanding and careful design. Music disc farming from creepers required the specific and somewhat complicated setup where a skeleton's arrow killed a creeper, causing it to drop a random music disc from the available pool. The setup difficulty came from needing to position a skeleton to shoot a creeper while preventing the skeleton from shooting you or the creeper from exploding before being hit by the arrow. The natural occurrence of this situation was rare, making music disc drops special occasions rather than common results of ordinary creeper encounters. The deliberate farming required creating controlled environments where you manipulated skeleton and creeper positioning to cause the specific interaction needed for disc drops, demonstrating advanced understanding of mob behaviors and combat mechanics. The discs' purely cosmetic value and their collection difficulty made them prestige items that showed dedication and game knowledge, creating achievements that had no mechanical benefit but significant social and completion value for players who cared about collecting all available items. The disc farming showed how Minecraft created collection goals beyond practical utility, how players found motivation in completing sets and obtaining rare items, even when those items provided no gameplay advantages, demonstrating that achievement and completion were intrinsically rewarding independent of practical benefits. Skeleton shooting mechanics required understanding how skeleton AI targeted and attacked to create situations where their arrows would hit creepers rather than players, demanding precise positioning and timing to orchestrate the necessary interactions. The skeletons prioritized targeting players but could be made to accidentally hit other mobs, including creepers, if those mobs moved into the arrow's path, or if the player positioned themselves so that the skeleton's shots would pass near creepers. The setup often involved using terrain or constructed barriers to create situations where you were safe from skeleton attacks, while creepers were exposed to the skeleton's fire, creating geometric puzzles about positioning all three entities optimally. The technique required patience as you maneuvered mobs into correct positions and waited for the skeleton to shoot at the right moment, making disc farming time-consuming activity that couldn't be rushed. The complexity of orchestrating the required interaction made successful disc farms feel like genuine achievements, demonstrating mastery of multiple game systems simultaneously and showing deep understanding of how Minecraft's combat and mob behaviors could be manipulated to achieve specific outcomes. The rare disc drop conditions made music discs special collectibles that many players never obtain naturally during normal gameplay, creating aspirational collection goals that required either lucky chance encounters or deliberate farming efforts. The drop requirement that specifically a skeleton's arrow must kill the creeper excluded all other damage sources, including player attacks, making the vast majority of creeper deaths ineligible for disc drops. The random disc selection from the available pool when drops occurred meant that getting complete collections required multiple successful farms, as you couldn't control which specific disc dropped from any particular creeper death. The rarity created trading economy in multiplayer where players with surplus discs could trade for other items, while disc collectors might trade valuable resources for discs they were missing from their collections. The rare drops demonstrated how Minecraft created different tiers of achievements and collections, how some items were meant to be common, while others were deliberately rare to create long-term goals and maintain engagement through collection challenges that required sustained effort to complete. All music discs obtainable through various methods included both the skeleton creeper drops and the specific disc pig step found only in nether bastion chests, creating complete collection that required both farming effort and exploration achievements. The full collection of 12 discs prior to later editions represented substantial time investment between the farming required for skeleton creeper drops and the bastion exploration needed for pig step. The discs served as decorative items that could be played in jukeboxes to hear their music, providing ambient sound options for bases and builds, while also serving as collectibles displayed in item frames to show off complete sets. The collection aspect appealed to completionist players who wanted to obtain every item type in the game, while the musical aspect appealed to players who enjoyed Minecraft's soundtrack and wanted to experience the various music pieces on demand. The disc collection demonstrated how items could serve multiple purposes simultaneously as collectibles, as functional music players, as decorative displays, creating layered appeal that made them valuable to different types of players for different reasons beyond just their mechanical rarity. Charged creeper mechanics detailed the process where lightning strikes within 3 or 4 blocks of a creeper, transformed it into a charged variant with blue electrical aura and significantly increased explosion power. The charged state made creepers even more dangerous than normal, with their explosions dealing roughly double damage and having larger blast radius that made them lethal even to well-armored players caught in the blast. The visual distinction of the blue aura made charged creepers identifiable from distance, giving players warning that they were facing a especially dangerous threat that required extra caution or avoidance. The charged state persisted permanently once applied, meaning that charged creepers created during thunderstorms would remain charged indefinitely until killed, creating lasting elevated threat levels in areas where lightning strikes had occurred. The mechanic added weather-dependent danger increases that made thunderstorms more than just atmospheric effects, creating gameplay impact, where storms increased risk levels and encouraged players to seek shelter, not just for immersion, but for legitimate safety concerns about charged creeper encounters. Creating charged creepers intentionally required either waiting for thunderstorms and hoping lightning struck near creepers naturally, or using channeling enchanted tridents to summon lightning strikes on creepers deliberately during storms. The intentional creation was challenging because thunderstorms were relatively rare. Channeling only worked during storms, and hitting creepers precisely with thrown tridents while preventing them from detonating required skill and careful execution. The difficulty of creating charged creepers on demand meant that obtaining mob heads from charged explosions was significant achievement, requiring either extensive patience, waiting for right conditions, or substantial skill, executing the acquired setup during limited windows when storms occurred. The intentional creation demonstrated advanced play, where players manipulated game systems to achieve specific outcomes, using enchantments, weather mechanics, and careful mob management together to accomplish goals that seemed nearly impossible without deep system knowledge and practical execution skill. Mob head drops from charged explosions occurred when charged creepers detonated within range of certain mob types, with the explosion causing those mobs to drop their heads as rare, collectible items. The mechanic only worked with charged creepers, making these explosions the exclusive method for obtaining zombie heads, skeleton skulls, and creeper heads through mob kills, rather than finding them in structures or through other means. The setup required getting the target mob within blast radius of a charged creeper, then causing detonation while ensuring the player wasn't also caught in the lethal explosion, creating logistical challenge that required careful positioning and timing. The head drops were guaranteed when the conditions were met, making charged creeper explosions reliable, if difficult method for obtaining these decorative items once you created the necessary setup. The mechanic demonstrated how Minecraft hid special interactions and rare drops behind complex multi-step procedures, rewarding players who experimented with systems and discovered unusual mechanics that weren't explicitly documented but that existed for dedicated players to find and exploit. Collecting all mob heads became achievement for dedicated players who wanted complete collections of decorative items, requiring both finding wither skeleton skulls in nether fortresses and using charged creeper explosions to obtain the zombie, skeleton, and creeper heads. The collection served purely decorative purposes, as the heads had no mechanical benefits but could be displayed in item frames, worn as armor pieces for aesthetic effect, or used in builds to add character and detail. The effort required to obtain complete collections demonstrated commitment and game knowledge, showing that players had mastered multiple game systems, from nether exploration to charged creeper creation to precise mob manipulation. The collection aspect appealed to completionists, while also providing something concrete to show off to other players, creating social value where displaying complete head collections communicated experience and dedication. The heads demonstrated how cosmetic items without mechanical benefits could still be highly valued and serve as aspirational goals that motivated players to engage with challenging content and master difficult techniques purely for collection and display purposes. The charged creeper's blue aura provided clear visual distinction that made charged variants immediately recognizable, giving players crucial information that they needed to treat encounter with extra caution or avoid entirely if possible. The blue electrical effect surrounding the creeper looked dramatic and dangerous, visually communicating increased threat level in ways that were obvious even to players unfamiliar with charged creeper mechanics. The aura persisted while the creeper moved and existed, serving as constant warning to anyone who saw the mob that this was not ordinary creeper, but enhanced version with more powerful explosion. The visual clarity demonstrated good enemy design where threat levels were communicated through appearance, where players could assess danger at a glance without needing to closely inspect mobs or rely on subtle cues easily missed during fast-paced gameplay. The distinctive appearance also made charged creepers exciting to encounter, despite their danger, creating moments of, "Oh no, it's a charged creeper," recognition that added variety to otherwise routine mob encounters and kept even experienced players alert and engaged. Increased explosion power of charged creepers meant that standard survival strategies that worked against normal creepers were insufficient, requiring extra distance, better armor, or complete avoidance to survive encounters safely. The doubled explosion damage meant that armor and protection enchantments that provided comfortable safety margin against normal creepers left you vulnerable to death from charged variants, requiring players to upgrade their defensive preparations or change tactics entirely. The larger blast radius meant that distance you thought was safe might still be within lethal range, that your practiced retreat distances needed adjustment when facing charged creepers rather than normal ones. The increased power created genuine fear, even in experienced players who had become comfortable handling normal creepers, revitalizing the threat and preventing creeper encounters from becoming routine or boring. The power increase demonstrated how variants and special mob versions could refresh combat encounters and maintain challenge for experienced players without requiring completely new mobs, showing that adjusting parameters of existing threats could be as effective as creating entirely new enemy types for maintaining engagement. Charged creeper rarity made encounters with them special events rather than routine occurrences, as the specific requirement for lightning strikes within range of creepers during thunderstorms meant that natural charged creeper creation was uncommon. The rarity meant that seeing a charged creeper was a noteworthy moment worth commenting on, creating stories and memorable encounters rather than being another routine mob to handle. The infrequency preserved charged creepers as special threats that maintained tension and didn't become so common that players developed completely reliable counter strategies through repeated practice. The rarity also maintained the prestige value of mob heads obtained through charged creeper kills, as the difficulty of orchestrating these events meant that complete head collections remained meaningful achievements rather than trivial tasks anyone could complete easily. The scarcity demonstrated intentional design choice to keep certain content rare and special rather than making everything commonly available, recognizing that some of a game's appeal came from having challenging aspirational goals that required dedication and often luck to achieve. trident channeling for charged creeper creation provided player-controlled method for summoning lightning during thunderstorms, enabling deliberate charged creeper creation rather than relying on random lightning strikes to hit creepers by chance. The channeling enchantment on tridents caused lightning bolts to strike wherever the trident hit during thunderstorms, giving precise control over lightning strike locations if you could accurately throw tridents. The technique required hitting creepers with thrown tridents during storms, which demanded good aim, proper timing to prevent creepers from detonating before being struck, and quick reactions to manage the charged creeper after creation. The player-controlled creation made mob head farming more feasible, as you could create charged creepers on demand when conditions were right rather than hoping for extremely rare natural occurrence. The channeling method demonstrated how enchantments could enable new gameplay possibilities beyond simple stat improvements, how tool modifications could grant capabilities that changed how you approached goals and challenges, how progression systems could unlock new strategies and approaches, rather than just making existing strategies more effective. Thunderstorm requirements for channeling meant that, even with the enchantment, charged creeper creation was limited to specific weather conditions that occurred unpredictably and lasted for limited time, maintaining some rarity and challenge around the process. The storm requirement meant you needed to be prepared to act quickly when storms occurred, having tridents ready and knowing where to find creepers for conversion. The time pressure during storms added urgency and challenge, as you had limited window to accomplish your goals before weather cleared and the opportunity passed. The weather dependency created interesting gameplay rhythm where certain activities were possible only during specific conditions, where you might wait for storms before attempting charged creeper creation, where weather became meaningful beyond just atmospheric effects. The requirement showed thoughtful balancing, where player-controlled lightning wasn't unrestricted but had meaningful limitations that prevented it from being overpowered, maintaining challenge and preventing the system from being exploited to trivialize content that was meant to remain difficult and require planning. And so we reach the midpoint of our creeper journey, having explored the mechanical depths of this explosive mob and learned how understanding its systems transformed it from mysterious instant death into predictable challenge, governed by specific rules that could be learned and mastered. We have seen how the creeper's explosion mechanics created rich tactical considerations about positioning, timing, equipment, and environmental awareness, how what seemed simple green mob that explodes actually contained layers of mechanical depth that skilled players could engage with to transform dangerous encounters into controlled situations. As you drift deeper into sleep, imagine yourself facing a creeper with complete confidence, hearing the hiss and knowing exactly how much time you have, knowing whether to fight or flee, executing practice strategies with calm precision born from understanding, turning what once caused panic into opportunity for demonstrating mastery. The creeper remains dangerous but no longer mysterious, its explosion predictable and survivable through knowledge and preparation, demonstrating that fear comes from uncertainty and that understanding mechanics transforms threats into challenges that can be overcome through skill and proper response. Sleep peacefully, knowing that even the most frightening game elements become manageable when you understand how they work, that knowledge is the ultimate defense against danger, that mastery comes from practice and understanding rather than from simply being fearless. Creeper in speedrunning strategies represents an interesting challenge where runners must balance the need to move quickly with the danger that creepers pose to both player health and the time-sensitive nature of optimized routes. Speedrunners develop sophisticated mental maps of where creepers are likely to spawn based on their route timing and world generation, allowing them to anticipate threats before seeing them and adjust pathing to minimize dangerous encounters. The decision-making around whether to fight creepers, flee from them, or simply tank damage and continue running demonstrates the mathematical optimization that underlies speedrunning, where runners calculate whether the time lost to combat exceeds the risk of death ending the run. The RNG element of creeper spawns means that even perfectly executed runs can fail due to unfortunate creeper placement, creating tension and unpredictability that makes speedrunning exciting to watch despite the repetitive nature of optimized routes. The creeper encounters in speedruns demonstrate how the same mob that terrorized casual players became a calculated risk factor for speedrunners who had transformed all of Minecraft into a mathematical puzzle to be solved through optimal decision-making and execution. Avoiding creepers efficiently in speedrunning contexts means learning to recognize their silhouettes at maximum render distance, immediately calculating whether their position threatens your route, and making instant decisions about whether slight detours or continued forward movement is optimal. The speedrunners develop peripheral vision and visual processing that allows them to scan for green vertical shapes while simultaneously managing other aspects of their run, demonstrating how practice develops perceptual skills that seem superhuman to casual observers. The avoidance strategies often involve subtle movement adjustments, slight changes in angle or speed that maintain forward progress while creating enough separation to prevent creepers from entering detonation range. The efficiency comes from minimizing wasted movement and time while still maintaining safety margins sufficient to prevent run-ending deaths, finding the exact boundary between acceptable risk and recklessness. The avoidance patterns demonstrate how speedrunners operate at the edge of what's possible, taking calculated risks that would seem foolish in normal play, but that make sense in context, where time is the only currency that matters, and deaths can be immediately reset by starting new attempts. Using creepers strategically in speedrunning includes rare but clever tactics, like deliberately allowing creepers to explode near specific blocks to create shortcuts, or using them to damage other mobs, demonstrating how even threats can become tools when approached with sufficient creativity. The strategic explosion use requires precise positioning to ensure the creeper explodes where intended, timing to trigger detonation at the right moment, and preparation to survive or avoid the blast yourself while still benefiting from the destruction created. The applications are niche and route-specific, appearing only in certain speedrun categories or specific situations where the time saved by creeper-created shortcuts exceeds the time invested in setup and execution. The strategic creeper use demonstrates how speedrunners view every game element as potential tool, rather than just obstacle. How optimization thinking transforms understanding of game systems into creative exploitation of mechanics for competitive advantage. The rare strategic applications show that no game element is purely negative if you're creative enough about finding ways to extract value from it, that threats can become assets when approached with proper mindset and technical understanding. Creeper explosions for mining represent inefficient but sometimes convenient method for rapidly excavating areas, with the explosion crater serving as instant mineshaft if you're willing to accept the danger and resource loss. The explosion removes blocks in spherical area without requiring tool durability or time investment in breaking blocks individually, creating instant excavation that can be useful in specific situations despite the risk. The lost blocks destroyed rather than dropped as items make this mining method wasteful compared to traditional mining, suitable only for situations where you need rapid excavation and don't care about collecting the materials removed. The danger from the explosion itself requires either sacrificing creepers without being present or having sufficient protection to survive the blast while staying close enough to direct where the explosion occurs. The mining application demonstrates how every game mechanic can be repurposed if you think creatively, how explosions designed as threats can become tools when you control when and where they occur, showing that Minecraft's systems are flexible enough to support uses that extend beyond their obvious intended purposes. The creeper face in pixel art became one of the most commonly recreated images in Minecraft building, with players creating creeper faces at every scale from tiny map art to enormous multi-chunk constructions visible from far distances. The simple geometric design made creeper faces ideal pixel art subjects, as the pattern was easy to plan and execute while being instantly recognizable when completed. The creations ranged from flat 2D wall decorations to three-dimensional statues with depth and detail, from faithful reproductions of the exact texture to artistic interpretations that captured the essence while adding creative flourishes. The pixel art creations demonstrated community affection for the creeper despite its destructive nature, showing that players had moved beyond just fearing the mob to appreciating it as icon and expressing that appreciation through creative works. The ubiquity of creeper face builds and community showcases and server spawn areas demonstrated that the creeper had transcended being simply enemy to become symbol of Minecraft itself, worthy of celebration and artistic representation. Building creeper statues evolved from simple pixel art faces into elaborate three-dimensional constructions that captured the creeper's full body form at massive scales that dominated landscapes. The statues used various materials to represent the different green shades in the creeper's texture, creating depth and visual interest through careful block choice and placement. Some builders created mechanical statues with redstone systems that made parts move or created explosion effects using TNT, bringing the statues to life through animation and interaction. The most ambitious projects created massive creepers that contained buildings inside them, using the statue form as shell for functional structures like shops, museums, or gathering spaces. The statue building demonstrated how community transformed feared enemy into celebration-worthy icon, how the mob that destroyed builds became itself the subject of elaborate construction projects, showing the complex relationship between players and the game elements that challenge them. The statues served as landmarks, meeting points, and symbols of community identity in multiplayer servers, where the creeper became mascot, representing the server's Minecraft-focused purpose. Creeper-themed bases took the appreciation further by creating entire living spaces and functional builds designed around creeper aesthetics, using green color schemes and incorporating creeper faces into architecture. The themed bases ranged from subtle uses of creeper imagery in decorative elements to complete commitment, where every structure incorporated creeper designs and all color choices reinforced the green theme. Some builders created bases inside giant creeper statues, making the mob itself serve as the structure housing all their functional needs and storage systems. The themed building demonstrated creativity and dedication, as maintaining consistent theme while still creating functional spaces required planning and sometimes accepting aesthetic choices that weren't optimal for visibility or practicality. The creeper theme showed how players could express personality and interests through their builds, using Minecraft's creative tools to make personal statements about what aspects of the game resonated with them most strongly. The bases became conversation pieces and showcases of both building skill and commitment to concept, demonstrating that Minecraft's building system supported expressing complex ideas and themes through careful material choice and architectural design. Community creeper appreciation manifested in countless ways, from fan art to merchandise to memes, with the creeper becoming one of gaming's most beloved enemy characters despite or because of the frustration it caused. The appreciation existed in tension with the fear and annoyance that creepers created during actual gameplay, with players simultaneously dreading encounters and celebrating the mob's existence and design. The community created elaborate backstories and personality for creepers despite the game providing no explicit lore, anthropomorphizing them as sad, lonely creatures or misunderstood beings that didn't want to explode but couldn't help their nature. The fan works ranged from serious artistic interpretations to absurd humor, from celebrations of good design to complaints about destroyed builds, showing that creeper appreciation wasn't simple or one-dimensional, but rather complex relationship where frustration and fondness coexisted. The community relationship demonstrated how good design created emotional investment, how a well-designed enemy became something players loved discussing and thinking about, rather than just an obstacle to overcome and forget. Creeper personality and animations by community content creators transformed the expressionless mob into characters with thoughts, feelings, and motivations that made them sympathetic, despite their destructive behavior. The animations portrayed creepers as various personalities, from malicious trolls who enjoyed destroying builds to innocent creatures who exploded accidentally and felt terrible about the damage they caused. The anthropomorphization gave the silent mob voice and character, creating narratives that explained or justified their behavior in ways that made them more than just mindless game mechanics. The animated creepers became characters audiences could relate to or sympathize with, transforming them from frustrating game element into personas with agency and emotion. The creative works demonstrated how communities expanded beyond games themselves to create rich fan work ecosystems where game elements became starting points for storytelling and character development. The animations showed that even simple game mobs could inspire elaborate creative works when communities became invested enough to imagine deeper personalities and motivations behind the mechanical behaviors they exhibited during gameplay. Why We Love What We Fear represents psychological phenomenon where the challenge and threat that creepers posed became part of their appeal, making them interesting rather than just annoying because they forced engagement and created memorable moments. The fear response created by creepers added excitement and tension to gameplay that would be missing without them, making exploration and building more engaging because safety couldn't be assumed. The mastery arc from initial terror to eventual competence created satisfying progression, where learning to handle creepers represented genuine achievement and skill development. The unpredictability maintained engagement even after mastering counter strategies, as occasional mistakes or surprising encounters kept players alert and prevented gameplay from becoming completely routine. The love-fear relationship demonstrated that game design excellence came not from eliminating all frustration, but from creating challenges that were fair, learnable, and satisfying to overcome, where the difficulty curve supported growth from incompetence to mastery in ways that made players feel accomplished rather than just relieved when they succeeded. Creeper sound design brilliance lies in how perfectly the hiss communicates urgency, danger, and approximate time remaining through a single, simple audio cue that never needs explanation but is instantly understood by anyone who hears it in context. The hiss is loud enough to be clearly audible above other game sounds, but not so loud that it feels cheap or unfair, calibrated to be noticeable without being jarring. The rising tone suggests building tension and approaching detonation, unconsciously communicating that time is running out and immediate action is necessary. The sound works across languages and cultures without need for translation or explanation, demonstrating universal sound design that communicates through pure audio texture rather than relying on cultural associations. The brilliance was that something so simple, essentially just noise, could become so iconic and effective at creating instant recognition and emotional response, showing that effective game audio didn't require complexity or musical sophistication, but rather needed to serve gameplay by communicating necessary information clearly and memorably. The hiss became one of gaming's most recognizable sounds, instantly triggering emotional responses in Minecraft players who heard it even outside of gameplay contexts. The hiss, as perfect warning, demonstrates how good game design provides players with information they need to respond appropriately while maintaining tension and challenge through timing and execution requirements. The warning gives players fighting chance to survive through proper response while still maintaining danger because the time window is tight and requires immediate action. The audio-only nature means you need to be alert and listening, rewarding awareness while punishing inattention or carelessness. The warning creates interesting decisions about whether to look for the source or immediately begin retreating, whether to trust your ears and respond without visual confirmation, or waste precious time confirming the threat before acting. The balance between fair warning and genuine danger demonstrates masterful game design, where mechanics created tension without feeling unfair, where deaths resulted from mistakes rather than randomness, where learning and skill development were possible because the system was consistent and predictable. The hiss shows that sometimes the smallest design elements, a simple sound effect, can be among the most important for making gameplay feel right and creating satisfying challenge rather than arbitrary difficulty. Creeper footstep silence serves as crucial contrast to the warning hiss, creating the approaching danger before you hear it, and making the hiss arrival a moment of sudden urgency rather than the conclusion to gradually building tension. The silence means that vigilance is rewarded while complacency is punished, that you need to actively scan surroundings rather than relying on audio cues to alert you to all threats. The design creates paranoia and tension during exploration, as you never know whether a creeper might be just behind you, making the silent approach psychologically effective at creating sustained, low-level anxiety. The silence then hiss pattern trains players to associate unexpected sounds with immediate danger, creating conditioned response where the hiss triggers instant reactions without need for conscious thought. The footstep silence demonstrates how absence of sound can be as important as sound itself in creating atmosphere and gameplay, how what you don't hear becomes part of the threat, how silence becomes pregnant with potential danger that makes every moment feel like something could go wrong without warning. Audio cues in gameplay shows how Minecraft used sound design to communicate crucial information, with the creeper hiss being perhaps the most important, but not only example, of audio serving gameplay functions beyond just atmosphere. The various mob sounds allowed players to identify threats without seeing them, turning audio into information source as important as visual input during dangerous situations. The sound design enabled audio-based navigation and awareness, where footsteps, mob sounds, and environmental audio created mental map of surroundings without needing to constantly look in all directions. The creeper hiss specifically demonstrated how gameplay-critical audio should be distinctive and recognizable, louder than ambient sounds, and associated clearly with specific threats so players could respond appropriately. The audio design philosophy showed understanding that games engaged multiple senses and that audio could carry gameplay information just as effectively as visual design. That sound design was not just about creating atmosphere, but about making games playable and communicating necessary information to players through carefully crafted audio cues. Creepers in different game modes showed how the same mob could serve different purposes and create different experiences depending on difficulty settings and mode rules. In peaceful mode, creepers didn't spawn at all, creating completely safe gameplay for players who wanted to focus purely on building without combat threats. In easy and normal difficulties, creepers spawned and exploded but dealt reduced damage that gave more forgiving learning curve for new players developing counter strategies. In hard mode, creepers dealt maximum damage that made them genuinely lethal, even to prepared players, requiring careful play and proper equipment to survive encounters reliably. The hardcore mode's permanent death made creepers existential threats where single mistake could end worlds representing hundreds of hours of work, transforming them from manageable enemies into creatures of genuine terror. The different modes showed how the same fundamental mechanics could create vastly different experiences through parameter adjustments, demonstrating that difficulty wasn't just about making numbers bigger, but about adjusting risk-reward calculations and consequence severity in ways that changed how players approached entire game. Peaceful mode absence of creepers created entirely different Minecraft experience where players could build without constant threat of explosive destruction, showing that the mob's presence or absence fundamentally changed gameplay feel and player behavior. The peaceful mode players could build more freely without worrying about defensive architecture, could leave areas unlit without risk, could focus purely on creative expression without combat interruptions. The absence made areas that were tense and dangerous in other modes into calm, peaceful spaces, transforming exploration from cautious, dangerous activity into relaxed discovery. The mode showed that Minecraft could support multiple playstyles by making core mechanics like hostile mob spawning optional, recognizing that not all players wanted or enjoyed combat challenge, and that building-focused gameplay was a valid approach that deserves support. The peaceful mode existence validated different ways of playing, showing that there wasn't single, correct way to experience Minecraft, but rather multiple valid approaches that served different preferences and priorities. Hard mode aggression changes made creepers more dangerous through increased explosion damage and potentially modified behavior that made them more effective at closing distance and detonating successfully. The hard mode creepers required better equipment, more careful play, and faster reactions to survive reliably, serving as appropriate challenge for experienced players who had mastered normal difficulty. The increased aggression created qualitatively different encounters, where strategies that worked on normal difficulty became insufficient, forcing players to develop new tactics or improve execution to maintain effectiveness. The hard mode served as aspirational difficulty for players seeking greater challenge, demonstrating mastery of game systems and mechanics through ability to survive in conditions that would overwhelm less skilled players. The difficulty scaling showed thoughtful design where game accommodated both casual players and hardcore challenge seekers through same content tuned differently, allowing everyone to experience core content at appropriate difficulty level for their skill and preference. Creeper and custom maps gave mapmakers enemy that was instantly recognizable and understood by all players, with established threat level and behavior patterns that could be incorporated into challenges without need for explanation. The custom map usage ranged from straightforward combat challenges, where you fought creepers in enclosed spaces, to puzzle applications, where you needed to manipulate creepers to solve environmental challenges. The creeper's explosion mechanic made it useful for map makers who needed destructible obstacles or environmental hazards that required timing and positioning to manage safely. The instant recognizability meant map makers could rely on player knowledge of creeper behavior, assuming that players would understand the threat and how to respond without needing tutorial sections explaining basic mechanics. The custom map applications demonstrated how iconic game elements became standardized tools that content creators could use confidently, knowing that audience familiarity made them effective building blocks for creating new experiences without needing to establish context or teach mechanics from scratch. Adventure map creeper usage showed creative applications where map makers used command blocks and clever design to modify creeper behavior, create scripted encounters, or use explosions as puzzle elements that players needed to trigger at specific times and locations. The adventure maps might place creepers in positions where their explosions opened paths, destroyed obstacles, or triggered events that advanced gameplay, transforming them from threats into tools that players learn to use deliberately. The controlled creeper encounters in adventure maps removed some randomness and uncertainty from creeper interactions, creating more predictable challenges that tested timing and execution rather than reaction speed and situational awareness. The maps demonstrated how Minecraft's mechanics could be repurposed through creative design and command block scripting, how standard game elements could serve completely different functions when placed in carefully controlled contexts designed by thoughtful creators. The adventure map creeper usage showed that game elements were ultimately neutral and their meaning came from context. Creepers weren't inherently just threats, but rather mechanics that could serve whatever purpose designers intended. When creating experiences, puzzle design with creepers used their explosion mechanic as solution elements rather than threats, requiring players to position creepers precisely and trigger explosions at right moments to destroy specific blocks or create paths forward. The puzzle design might require understanding blast radius to ensure explosions affected correct blocks without destroying wrong areas, demonstrating knowledge of explosion mechanics transformed into puzzle-solving skill. The timing challenges, where you needed to trigger explosions while avoiding damage yourself, added execution requirements to conceptual understanding, creating puzzles that tested both planning and mechanical skill. The puzzle applications demonstrated how threatening mechanics could become engaging puzzle elements when context removed immediate danger and reframed the mechanic as tool rather than threat. The creeper puzzles showed creative map design where familiar elements were used in unfamiliar ways, challenging player assumptions about how game elements should function and encouraging flexible thinking about what was possible within Minecraft's systems. The creeper's expressionless face creates fascinating psychological phenomenon where players project emotion and meaning onto neutral pattern, seeing sadness, menace, confusion, or other emotions in pixels that don't actually depict any specific expression. The human tendency toward pareidolia, seeing faces and expressions in random patterns, means that the simple squares forming the creeper's face become canvas for projection, where players see what they expect or want to see rather than what's objectively present. The expressionless design makes creepers simultaneously more and less threatening. Less threatening because they don't look actively malicious, more threatening because you can't read intent or emotion to predict behavior. The neutral face makes creepers mysterious and interpretable, allowing community to create varying characterizations from sad, lonely creatures to malicious griefers without any one interpretation being definitively correct or incorrect. The face demonstrates how minimalist design can be more effective than detailed depiction, because it leaves room for interpretation, allowing audiences to fill gaps with their own imagination rather than being told explicitly what to see or feel. Interpreting emotion in simplicity shows how human brains are so specialized for recognizing faces and expressions that we see them even in abstract patterns, making the creeper's minimal face paradoxically more expressive through our interpretation than more detailed depiction might be. The 4 dark pixels suggesting eyes can seem sad, angry, worried, or neutral, depending on context and viewer interpretation, demonstrating how same pattern can communicate different emotions based on framing and expectation. The ambiguity allows the creeper to be whatever the situation or community interpretation requires. Sympathetic character in fan works, pure threat in gameplay, the comic relief in memes, showing versatility that comes from not defining things too specifically. The simple face becomes Rorschach test, where what we see reveals as much about us as about the design itself, making the creeper's face not just game texture but psychological prompt that engages our pattern recognition and tendency to anthropomorphize. The simplicity's effectiveness shows that detailed rendering isn't necessary for emotional impact, that suggestion and minimal information can be more powerful than exhaustive depiction because they engage viewers' imagination as active participant in creating meaning. The sad creeper meme emerged from interpretations of the face as displaying melancholy or unhappiness, creating sympathetic portrayal where creepers were lonely, misunderstood creatures that didn't want to explode but couldn't control their nature. The meme versions portrayed creepers as victims of their own biology, experiencing regret and sadness about the destruction they caused, but unable to prevent the explosions that made everyone fear and hate them. The sympathetic interpretation created humor through incongruity between the fear creepers inspired in gameplay and the pathetic sadness attributed to them in memes, making jokes that played on both perspectives simultaneously. The sad creeper became canvas for various emotional narratives about loneliness, rejection, and being misunderstood, using the game mob as metaphor for broader human experiences of social isolation and involuntary behavior that damages relationships. The meme demonstrated how game elements could become cultural symbols that transcended their source material, how simple game mobs could be reinterpreted through creative works into vehicles for expressing complex emotions and ideas that had nothing to do with original gameplay functions. Creeper empathy in community showed how players developed emotional relationships with mobs that killed them and destroyed their builds, demonstrating that frustration and affection weren't mutually exclusive but could coexist in complex relationship. The empathy manifested in reluctance to kill creepers in some players, in sadness when forced to kill them for gunpowder, in feeling guilt about farming them, despite knowing they were just game mechanics without actual feelings. The emotional investment showed how effective characterization, even minimal characterization through distinctive appearance and behavior, could create connections that transcended rational understanding that game entities weren't real. The community's emotional relationship with creepers included elements of Stockholm Syndrome, where victims developed affection for tormentors, though in this case the relationship was playful and self-aware rather than genuinely traumatic. The empathy demonstrated how games created emotional experiences that felt real and meaningful, despite players knowing intellectually that nothing in the game was actually alive or capable of feeling, showing that emotional engagement didn't require believing illusion was real, but simply allowing yourself to care about fictional entities and situations. Baby creepers that don't exist represent interesting absence in Minecraft's mob system, as most neutral and hostile mobs have baby variants, but creepers notably don't, creating curious gap in world logic. The absence means creepers don't breed, don't have visible offspring, and appear to exist as only adult forms without any suggestion of reproduction or life cycle. The lack of baby creepers prevents players from breeding them, making them impossible to farm through animal husbandry methods that work for many other mobs. The absence also prevents emotional situations where players might encounter baby creepers and feel bad about killing them, maintaining creepers as pure threats without introducing sympathetic baby versions that might create moral complications. The design choice demonstrated that not all mobs needed complete biological simulation, that some could exist as game mechanics without need for elaborate life cycle explanations, that sometimes simplicity served gameplay better than attempting comprehensive world-building logic. The absence showed that what you don't include can be as important as what you do include, that restraint in adding features sometimes served design better than attempting to address every possible question or create complete internal consistency. Why creepers don't have babies likely relates to game design decision that creepers were meant to be pure threats without sympathetic elements that might complicate player relationships with them or create situations where killing them felt unnecessarily cruel. The baby mob variants in Minecraft typically serve breeding mechanics for renewable resources or exist for aesthetic completeness, neither of which applied to creepers as hostile mobs whose drops came from combat rather than breeding. The absence maintained creepers as obstacles to overcome rather than creatures to nurture, keeping gameplay focus on combat and survival rather than introducing caretaking or breeding systems. The design choice showed understanding that not every game element needed complete simulation, that creepers could serve their gameplay purpose, providing combat challenge and dropping gunpowder without requiring elaborate life cycle or reproduction mechanics. The lack of baby creepers demonstrated restraint in design, where developers resisted temptation to add features that weren't necessary or that might actually detract from core functionality, showing that good design sometimes meant recognizing what not to include, rather than constantly adding more complexity and features. Creeper lore and theories developed by community attempted to explain creeper origins, biology, and purpose within Minecraft's world, creating unofficial narratives that filled gaps left by game's minimal storytelling. The theories ranged from biological speculation about creepers being plant-based life forms that exploded to spread spores, to technological explanations involving ancient builders creating creepers as weapons or guardians. Some theories connected creepers to the game's mysterious history, suggesting they were failed experiments or corrupted creatures transformed by some ancient catastrophe. The lore creation demonstrated community investment in world building, even when game didn't provide explicit answers, showing that players wanted to understand their game world and would create explanations to fill narrative gaps. The theories became self-sustaining community discussion topics, where lack of official canon allowed endless speculation and creative interpretation, making the mystery itself engaging content that inspired discussion and creative works. The community lore showed how games with minimal explicit storytelling could paradoxically inspire rich narrative speculation, precisely because ambiguity left room for imagination and interpretation. Ancient builder connection theories proposed that creepers were somehow related to the mysterious ancient civilization that built strongholds, temples, and other structures, perhaps created as guardians or weapons that persisted after builders disappeared. The theories pointed to creepers dropping gunpowder, suggesting technological rather than natural origin, and their seemingly purposeless explosive behavior as evidence of artificial creation. Some elaborate theories suggested creepers were meant to be builders' protection but malfunctioned or were corrupted, turning them from guardians into threats that attacked everyone indiscriminately. The ancient builder framework provided convenient explanation for various mysterious Minecraft elements, with creepers fitting into larger narrative about vanished civilization and its remnants. The theories demonstrated how players created coherent narratives from disparate game elements, connecting things that might not be deliberately connected to create satisfying explanatory frameworks. The speculation showed that good world building sometimes came from what you didn't explain rather than from exposition, that mystery and ambiguity could be more engaging than definitive answers because they invited participation and creative interpretation. Why creepers explode themselves represents core mystery that theories attempted to explain, as the kamikaze behavior seemed bizarre and counter to survival instincts that most creatures would exhibit. The theories ranged from suggesting creepers were compelled by instinct they couldn't control to proposing they didn't die in explosions but rather dispersed and reformed elsewhere, making the apparent suicide actually a form of reproduction or movement. Some theories proposed creepers were so filled with explosive material that any damage or stress caused detonation, making the explosion involuntary response rather than deliberate attack strategy. The biological theories suggested explosions spread spores or seeds, making the seemingly self-destructive behavior actually reproductive strategy, ensuring species continuation. The speculation about explosion motivation showed how unusual game mechanics prompted creative explanatory attempts, how players wanted behaviors to make sense within their understanding of how living creatures should function. The mystery's appeal was that no official answer existed, leaving room for endless speculation and ensuring that creeper behavior remained interesting topic rather than settled question with boring canonical explanation. Kamikaze behavior explanations needed to account for why natural selection would favor creatures that killed themselves when attacking, leading to elaborate theories about reproductive cycles, spore spreading, or non-biological origins that made self-destruction logical. The evolution-based theories struggled with the suicide problem. How could behaviors that killed the organism before reproduction persist through generations, leading to creative solutions about explosion not actually being fatal or serving reproductive purposes? The non-biological theories avoided evolution problems by positing creepers as created rather than evolved entities, making the kamikaze behavior result of programming or design rather than natural selection. The supernatural explanations suggested creepers existed as cursed or magical creatures not bound by normal biological rules, allowing behaviors that wouldn't make sense for natural organisms. The variety of explanatory attempts showed how one unusual mechanic, the self-destructive explosion, could generate extensive speculation and creative theory crafting, demonstrating that interesting mysteries could emerge from simple gameplay mechanics when they violated normal expectations about how creatures should behave. Creeper biology speculation took various forms, including theories about creeper internal structure, composition, and the mechanism by which explosions occurred, treating game mechanics as biological puzzles to solve. The plant-based theories pointed to green color and suggested photosynthesis or chlorophyll, proposing creepers were mobile plants that stored explosive compounds generated through unique metabolism. The fungus theories suggested creepers were ambulatory mushrooms or spore bearers whose explosions served to spread reproductive spores over wide areas. The chemical composition theories proposed creepers were essentially living bombs filled with unstable compounds that detonated on impact or when stressed. The mechanical theories suggested creepers weren't biological at all, but rather constructs or robots designed to appear organic while serving destructive purpose. The speculation demonstrated how games could inspire scientific-style thinking, where players applied real-world knowledge to fictional systems, using biological and chemical principles to create plausible-seeming explanations for game mechanics, showing that even purely entertainment media could engage analytical thinking and creative problem solving. Made of gunpowder theory proposed that creepers were literally composed primarily of gunpowder or similar explosive material, explaining both why they dropped gunpowder when killed and why they exploded when agitated. The theory suggested creeper physiology was fundamentally different from normal organisms, with their body structure designed around containing and controlling explosive material that became their primary characteristic. The gunpowder composition would explain their distinctive texture. The mottled green might represent containment material or biological structures designed to prevent accidental detonation. The theory raised questions about how such creatures could exist or evolve, typically leading to explanations involving magical origins or artificial creation rather than natural evolution. The gunpowder theory became popular because it elegantly explained multiple creeper features: the drops, the explosion, the distinctive appearance through single biological principle, demonstrating how good theories provided parsimonious explanations that accounted for multiple observations through minimal assumptions. Plant-like characteristics theories pointed to creeper green coloring and their ability to survive in darkness without apparent food source, suggesting photosynthesis or similar plant-based metabolism. The theories sometimes included ideas about creepers absorbing nutrients from soil or air, explaining how they sustain themselves without visible eating behavior. The plant connection led to speculation about creepers being mobile plant-fungus hybrids, using mushroom-like reproduction through spore explosion while having plant-like energy generation through photosynthesis. The jokes about creepers performing photosynthesis became minor memes showing how community played with biological speculation in humorous ways. The plant theories demonstrated how even the simplest visual cue, green color, could inspire elaborate biological speculation, showing that players engaged deeply with game world logic and attempted to create coherent explanatory systems, even for purely mechanical game elements that weren't designed with realistic biology in mind. The creeper in Minecraft Dungeons appeared as enemy in the Dungeon Crawler spin-off game, adapted to fit the different gameplay style while maintaining recognizable appearance and explosion mechanic that made it iconic. The Dungeons creeper functioned differently than in main Minecraft, with adapted AI and combat balance appropriate for the action RPG gameplay rather than sandbox survival context. The inclusion demonstrated creepers' position as Minecraft's most iconic mob, being essentially mandatory inclusion in any Minecraft-branded game regardless of genre. The adaptation showed how core game elements could be translated across different gameplay styles while maintaining enough similarity to feel familiar, balancing recognition with mechanical adjustment appropriate for new context. The dungeon's appearance validated Creeper as transcendent Minecraft element that existed beyond any single game or genre, becoming symbol of franchise that needed to appear in any officially branded content regardless of whether it fit naturally into gameplay systems being developed. Spin-off appearances of creepers across various Minecraft-related media, including story mode, promotional materials, toys, and other products, demonstrated how the mob became the face of Minecraft across all platforms and contexts. The creeper appeared more prominently than player character Steve in many marketing contexts, showing that hostile mob had become more recognizable as Minecraft symbol than the avatar players actually controlled. The consistent appearance across media maintained brand coherence and recognition, using creeper face as shorthand for "this is Minecraft content" in contexts from YouTube thumbnails to store displays. The cross-media presence demonstrated successful character design that worked across contexts, remaining recognizable whether as pixelated game sprite, three-dimensional render, or stylized icon. The Creeper's multimedia success showed how game design could create characters that transcended their original medium to become cultural symbols with meaning and recognition beyond their gameplay functions. Creeper variants in other games showed the influence of Minecraft's design on gaming broadly, with explosion-based suicide enemies appearing in various games after Minecraft popularized the mechanic. The variants ranged from obvious homages that directly referenced Minecraft to similar mechanics that might have been independently developed but shared conceptual DNA with Creeper design. The influence demonstrated that good game design ideas spread through gaming culture, with successful mechanics being adapted and iterated upon by other developers. The Creeper variants showed respect for Minecraft's impact, while also demonstrating how game design built on previous innovations, with each new implementation potentially improving or adapting the core concept for different contexts. The propagation of creeper-like enemies through gaming demonstrated successful design's influence, showing that mechanics that worked well would be studied, adapted, and incorporated into other games as developers learned from successes and built on foundations established by influential titles. Creeper influence on game design extended beyond just similar enemies to broader impact on how games thought about enemy design, risk-reward balance, and creating memorable threats that shaped player behavior. The Creeper demonstrated that enemies didn't need complex behaviors or elaborate designs to be effective and memorable, that simplicity combined with dangerous mechanics could create lasting impact. The design showed that giving players clear information, the hiss warning, while still maintaining challenge through timing requirements, created satisfying difficulty that felt fair rather than cheap. The influence appeared in how games approached enemy telegraphing, warning systems, and the balance between giving players information they needed and maintaining challenge through execution requirements. The Creeper's legacy included teaching developers that distinctive audio cues could create instant recognition and appropriate responses, that sound design was a crucial gameplay element rather than just atmospheric flourish. The design influence demonstrated that truly great game design became teaching tool for entire medium, with successful implementations being studied and learning being incorporated into collective understanding of what made good game design. Suicide enemies in other games often referenced or were inspired by Minecraft's Creeper, showing how the mob established template for how explosion-based self-destructive enemies could function effectively in game contexts. The suicide enemy type appeared across genres after Minecraft, from action games to shooters to RPGs, demonstrating versatility of the basic concept. The implementations varied in specifics. Some had longer fuses, others faster movement. Some dealt more damage but shared core concept of enemies that posed threat through getting close and detonating. The variety showed how fundamental concept could be adapted to different contexts and gameplay needs while maintaining core danger that made enemy type effective. The suicide enemies became standard game design element with understood tropes and player expectations, largely established by Creeper's successful implementation of the archetype. The legacy demonstrated how single well-designed game element could influence medium-wide design vocabulary, creating new standard enemy type that became part of shared game design language used across studios and genres. The Creeper's unique contribution to gaming was creating the perfect balance of several elements: the silent approach, the audio warning, the brief window to respond, the destructive aftermath into cohesive enemy design that had not existed in that specific combination before Minecraft. The uniqueness came from how these elements worked together, creating enemy that was fair but threatening, scary but manageable, simple but memorable. The contribution extended beyond mechanical design to cultural impact, with Creeper becoming gaming's most recognizable suicide enemy and the standard against which similar designs were measured. The unique achievement was creating enemy that players simultaneously hated and loved, feared and appreciated, wanted to avoid, but also wanted to encounter because encounters were memorable and engaging. The Creeper showed that great design created complex emotional relationships rather than simple responses, that the most successful game elements inspired strong feelings that might even seem contradictory, but that enriched overall experience. No other mob like the Creeper exists in terms of combining iconic status, gameplay impact, emotional response, and cultural penetration in ways that made it simultaneously feared enemy and beloved mascot. The zombies and skeletons, while threatening, remained generic fantasy enemies that appeared in countless games, lacking the distinctive personality and memorable mechanics that made Creepers special. The Endermen came closest to achieving similar iconic status with their unique teleportation and eerie behavior, but even they didn't match the Creeper's cultural penetration or instantly recognizable silhouette that transcended gaming to become broader pop culture symbol. The uniqueness came from the perfect storm of accidental creation, distinctive simple design, terrifying but fair mechanics, and timing of appearing in game that would become cultural phenomenon, creating conditions where this one mob could achieve legendary status that no other Minecraft creature matched. The Creeper demonstrated that truly iconic characters often couldn't be deliberately designed, but rather emerged from fortunate accidents, creative decisions to embrace mistakes, and connection with audiences in ways that couldn't be predicted or replicated through careful planning. Befriending the unbefriendable represents the fundamental impossibility that makes Creepers eternally other in Minecraft. Unlike wolves, cats, horses, and many other mobs, Creepers cannot be tamed, befriended, or made peaceful through any in-game mechanics. The inability to pacify Creepers means they remain permanent threats in any world where hostile mobs spawn, creating consistent challenge that never disappears regardless of player progression or preparation. The unbefriendable nature maintains Creepers as obstacles rather than potential resources or companions, ensuring their role remains focused on providing danger and challenge rather than becoming another farming or utility mechanic. The design choice showed restraint in not adding taming or befriending mechanics that might have made sense from world-building perspective, but would have undermined Creepers' core identity as threats. The permanent hostility meant that players could never truly relax completely, that even fully developed bases in thoroughly lit areas needed vigilance because Creepers spawning in any dark corner would remain threats rather than becoming domesticated, neutral presence like tamed wolves or cats. Why you can't tame Creepers relates to their design purpose as pure hostile mobs whose entire function was providing danger and challenge without secondary purposes like providing resources through farming or companionship through taming. The inability to tame maintained clear category distinction where some mobs were always hostile, some always neutral, and some could be tamed, preventing confusion about what each mob type represented and how players should interact with them. The design choice meant Creepers never became resources to exploit or tools to use, maintaining their position as obstacles to overcome rather than assets to acquire. The impossibility of taming preserved Creepers' threatening nature and prevented trivialization where players might have turned dangerous enemies into harmless or even beneficial creatures through game mechanics. The unbefriendable status showed design philosophy where not everything in game needed to be controllable or exploitable, where some elements existed purely to challenge players rather than being transformed into tools or resources, maintaining clear enemy identity that never blurred into neutral or friendly territory. Modded creeper variants created by community mod developers showed creative explorations of what creepers could be when freed from vanilla games constraints, ranging from subtle tweaks to completely reimagined versions. The mods included creepers with different explosion powers, varying movement speeds, alternative behaviors like shooting projectiles instead of exploding, and even beneficial creepers that healed or built instead of destroying. The charged variants beyond vanilla's lightning-struck version included fire creepers, ice creepers, and elemental versions with themed effects and appearances. Some mods added creeper variants that dropped specific resources, making them farmable for particular materials while maintaining dangerous harvest mechanics. The baby creeper mods filled the gap vanilla left, creating small versions with reduced explosion power or unique behaviors. The modded variants demonstrated community desire to expand on successful design by exploring variations and alternatives, showing that even well-designed elements could inspire creative reinterpretation and expansion. The mods validated creeper design by showing that community wanted more creeper content rather than removing or replacing them, that the core concept was solid enough to support countless variations and iterations. The creeper's journey from coding mistake to gaming icon represents one of Medium's most remarkable character design stories, demonstrating how accidents could produce better results than deliberate planning when creators recognize potential in mistakes. The accidental origin story became part of creeper mythology, teaching lesson about creative process being as much about recognizing and embracing happy accidents as about executing planned designs perfectly. The transformation from bug to feature showed importance of flexible creative thinking, where you evaluated ideas based on their potential rather than whether they were originally intended, where you could change course when something unexpected proved interesting. The iconic status demonstrated that players responded to distinctive design and memorable mechanics rather than to elaborate backstories or complex appearances. That simplicity combined with effectiveness could create lasting cultural impact. The journey validated approaches to creative work that embraced experimentation and accident rather than demanding perfect execution of predetermined plans, showing that sometimes the best outcomes emerged from willingness to deviate from plans and explore unexpected possibilities. The Creeper as teaching tool showed how game design could educate players about important concepts like spatial awareness, quick decision-making, risk assessment, and learning from mistakes through gameplay experience rather than explicit instruction. The Creeper encounters taught players to maintain environmental awareness and regularly check surroundings rather than tunnel visioning on immediate tasks, developing habits that transferred to other games and even real-life situations requiring vigilance. The quick reactions required to survive Creeper encounters trained reflexes and decision-making speed, teaching players to assess situations and respond appropriately under time pressure. The consequences of mistakes, death, and destroyed builds taught that errors had meaningful costs and that learning to avoid mistakes was an important skill worth developing. The lessons came through experience rather than lectures or tutorials, demonstrating how games could teach through doing and through natural consequences rather than through explicit instruction, showing that experiential learning through gameplay could be more effective than traditional teaching methods for certain types of knowledge and skills. Community Creeper celebrations showed how players honored the mob through various creative expressions, from artwork to builds to events, demonstrating affection that seemed paradoxical given how much frustration creepers caused. The celebration took forms like creeper-themed parties on servers, building competitions focused on creeper designs, fan art contests, and community events where creepers were honored rather than simply being threats to overcome. The celebrations showed complex relationship where frustration and fondness coexisted, where players could simultaneously complain about creeper damage and also celebrate the mob's existence and design. The community events demonstrated that creepers had transcended being just game mechanics to become cultural touchstones around which communities organized and expressed shared identity. The celebrations validated creeper design by showing that it had created meaningful emotional engagement, that players cared enough about this mob to organize events and create art celebrating it, demonstrating that successful game design created strong feelings and lasting impressions that justified recognition and commemoration. The creeper philosophy represents the game design principle that good enemies should be simple, distinctive, and create clear gameplay challenges while maintaining fair counterplay that rewards skill and preparation. The creeper embodied minimalist design where small number of well-executed elements combined to create memorable and effective whole. The philosophy taught that enemies didn't need elaborate attack patterns or complex AI to be engaging, that straightforward threats with clear counter strategies could create satisfying gameplay through consistency and appropriate challenge levels. The design showed importance of clear communication through audio and visual cues, ensuring players had information needed to respond appropriately while maintaining challenge through timing and execution requirements. The philosophy demonstrated that fairness and difficulty could coexist, that threatening enemies could avoid feeling cheap or unfair by providing warnings and consistent behavior that allowed learning and mastery. The Creeper as design case study taught developers across gaming industry about balancing threat with fairness, simplicity with effectiveness, creating lessons that influenced enemy design broadly. Why creepers work as design stems from multiple factors working in harmony. The simple, distinctive appearance made them instantly recognizable. The explosion mechanic created meaningful threat with permanent consequences. The audio warning provided fair chance to respond, and the consistent behavior allowed mastery through learning. The combination created enemy that new players feared appropriately, while experienced players respected without becoming complacent, maintaining engagement across skill levels and play time. The design worked because it respected players by being fair and consistent, while still maintaining challenge through tight timing and meaningful consequences for mistakes. The effectiveness came from how all elements reinforced each other. The silent approach made the hiss more impactful. The hiss made the explosion feel fair. The explosion damage made the warning feel urgent, creating positive feedback loop where every element enhanced others. The successful design demonstrated that great game elements weren't created through individual brilliant components, but through how multiple adequate components combined and reinforced each other to create cohesive, effective whole greater than sum of its parts. Creeper, as meditation on mortality in gaming, represents how the mob taught players about death, loss, and recovery in low-stakes environment where failure had consequences but could be overcome through perseverance. The deaths to creepers were frustrating but not permanent in most modes, teaching that failure was recoverable setback rather than final ending. The destroyed builds taught lessons about attachment and loss, about how things you invested time creating could be destroyed instantly, preparing players emotionally for handling losses in games and potentially in life. The recovery process after creeper damage, rebuilding destroyed sections, replacing lost items, continuing despite setbacks, taught resilience and persistence, demonstrating that setbacks could be overcome through continued effort. The creeper encounters created repeated cycles of threat, loss, recovery, and growth that taught emotional and psychological lessons about handling adversity, making Minecraft subtly educational in ways that extended beyond just game mechanics into broader life skills about coping with setbacks and maintaining motivation despite frustrations. The Creeper legacy, after 15 years, shows how well-designed game elements could maintain relevance and impact across gaming generations, remaining threatening and memorable to new players while still respected by veterans. The enduring effectiveness demonstrated that good design was timeless rather than dependent on graphics technology or contemporary trends, that simple but well-executed concepts could work as well decades later as they did initially. The legacy included inspiring countless derivative enemies in other games, becoming gaming culture reference point that extended beyond Minecraft players, and maintaining position as gaming's most iconic hostile mob, despite numerous competitors and alternatives. The continued relevance showed that Creeper had achieved something rare in gaming, becoming permanent part of gaming vocabulary and shared cultural knowledge that would persist long after Minecraft's active player base eventually declined. The legacy validated original design decisions and the choice to embrace happy accidents rather than dismissing them, teaching creative lesson that some of the most important and lasting contributions came from unexpected places rather than careful planning. Looking forward, the Creeper's future in Minecraft seems secure, as the mob has become so integral to game identity that removing or fundamentally changing it would face enormous community resistance and would damage what makes Minecraft recognizable. The future likely includes continued refinement of Creeper mechanics through subtle balancing changes, potential new variants that explore different expressions of core explosion concept, and continued prominent featuring in marketing and merchandising as Minecraft's primary mascot. The Creeper will likely remain teaching tool for new players joining Minecraft years or decades from now, still providing that crucial lesson about vigilance and environmental awareness that has defined the mob's educational role since its creation. The long-term future might include creepers appearing in Minecraft sequels or successors if any are ever created, serving as connection to original game and maintaining continuity across whatever evolution Minecraft undergoes. The future seems bright for this accidental creation that became gaming icon, suggesting that the Creeper's hiss will continue echoing through virtual worlds and striking fear and fondness into player hearts for as long as Minecraft exists, and probably beyond. The final lesson of the Creeper is that perfection in design often comes from embracing imperfection, that the mistakes and accidents can produce better results than careful planning if you maintain flexibility to recognize potential in unexpected outcomes. The Creeper teaches designers to look for possibilities in errors, to evaluate ideas based on merit rather than origin, to be willing to deviate from plans when something more interesting appears. The mob demonstrates that simple concepts executed well can outlast and outperform complex systems, that distinctive identity matters more than elaborate mechanics, that emotional engagement comes from creating experiences that resonate rather than from impressive technical achievement. The Creeper shows that players remember how games make them feel more than specific mechanical details, that creating fear followed by mastery creates satisfying progression arc, that enemies can become beloved rather than just tolerated when designed thoughtfully with respect for player time and effort. The ultimate lesson is that great design often can't be planned but must be discovered, that creative work requires remaining open to unexpected possibilities, and that sometimes the best results come from saying yes to accidents rather than dismissing them as mistakes to be corrected and forgotten. And so we close our complete journey through the Creeper's story, having traced this mob from programming error through terrifying first encounters to beloved icon that defined what made Minecraft special and influenced game design across the industry. We have seen how simple design could create complex emotional relationships, how clear mechanics and fair warnings could make lethal threats feel appropriately challenging rather than cheap, how community could transform feared enemy into celebrated mascot while still respecting its dangerous nature. We have learned that the Creeper represented design excellence through simplicity, that its power came not from elaborate systems but from how basic elements combined perfectly to create memorable, effective whole. As you drift into final deep sleep, imagine hearing that hiss one last time but feeling not panic but appreciation, recognizing it as sound of brilliant design, of happy accidents embraced, of lessons learned through experience rather than instruction, of fear transformed into fondness through familiarity and understanding, of perfect balance between threat and fairness that created engagement rather than frustration, of game design at its finest, showing that sometimes the mistakes we make are exactly what we needed to discover all along. The Creeper taught us that hostile doesn't mean unlikable, that simple doesn't mean shallow, that accidental doesn't mean inferior, that fear can become fondness without losing respect, that good design creates complex feelings rather than simple responses, that the most memorable characters often weren't the ones carefully planned, but rather the ones that emerged unexpectedly and were embraced rather than dismissed. The hiss echoes now not just as warning but as reminder of lessons learned, of builds destroyed and rebuilt, of panic transformed into practiced response, of how one mob defined a game and influenced a medium, of how mistake became mascot and bug became beloved icon. Sleep peacefully knowing that somewhere in the darkness of a Minecraft night, creepers still spawn and silently approach, still hiss their warnings and explode their warnings, still teaching new generations the same lessons they taught us, still being simultaneously the most feared and most loved enemy in gaming history, still proving that sometimes perfection comes from embracing imperfection, and that the best designs often begin with the words, "Wait, that's interesting," rather than, "Let me fix this mistake. Good night, and may your dreams be filled with green mobs and purple explosions, with hisses heard just in time, with craters that become stories, with fear that becomes respect, with the strange paradox of loving what threatens you, and with appreciation for designs so perfect that it could only have emerged from accident, creativity, and the wisdom to recognize potential in mistakes." The Creeper's legacy endures, immortal and explosive, forever teaching that vigilance is necessary, that mistakes can be features, and that sometimes the things that scare us most become the things we can't imagine living without.